Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the most fascinating, high-stakes stories in modern history, Japan's rapid national reinvention. We're going to look closely at how a nation completely transformed itself from the ground up, restructuring its government, its military, and its entire place on the global stage. And get this, they did it all in just a few short decades. It's an absolutely remarkable story of survival, rapid adaptation, and, well, the complex consequences of absolute power. To really appreciate the sheer scale of this, ask yourself, how does a society completely rewrite its own DNA in a single lifetime? Just imagine Japan in the early 1800s. We're talking about an isolated, strictly feudal society ruled by swords and deeply entrenched class systems. Yet, fast forward just a few decades to the early 1900s, and they've become Asia's primary imperial force. They're commanding modern dreadnoughts and running a massive industrial economy. Moving from absolute isolation to absolute regional dominance, that is an incredible leap. And understanding exactly how they bridged that enormous gap is what we're charting out today. Part 1. The 1853 Wake-Up Call. Okay, let's dive into this. 1853. This isn't just some random number on a timeline. It's the exact moment everything changed. You see, for over 2 centuries, Japan had intentionally, and I mean strictly, cut itself off from the rest of the globe through a policy called sakoku. Under this system, almost no foreigner was allowed in, and no Japanese citizen was allowed out under penalty of death. Now, this intense policy of isolation definitely preserved peace, but it essentially froze their technological development. Their whole way of life was completely sealed off. But then, in 1853, the outside world knocked on their door, and they really didn't do it politely. Suddenly, American Commodore Matthew Perry sailed into Edo Bay with a fleet of steam-powered warships. The Japanese actually called them black ships because of the dark smoke just billowing from their engines. For Japan, this was a terrifying existential threat. Think about it. They were facing massive ironclad vessels packing explosive shell guns, while their own coastal defenses, mostly outdated cannons and samurai armed with swords. This glaring military vulnerability forced Japan to accept a series of humiliating agreements known as the unequal treaties. Literally overnight, Japan lost control over its own trade tariffs, and foreign citizens got immunity from Japanese law. They realized instantly that if they didn't rapidly adapt, they were going to be carved up and colonized, just like so many of their neighbors. Part 2. The Meiji Restoration. Faced with this immense global threat, Japan didn't just tweak their policies. No, they launched a radical, ground-up internal revolution to ensure their survival. This restructuring was systematic and aggressive. Now, what's really interesting about this process is how they completely overhauled their society in 3 major steps. Step 1, they abolished the shogunate. They basically tore down a 700-year-old feudal military government, which effectively ended the elite samurai class in the process. Step 2, they centralized power entirely under a young emperor, creating a unified, singular authority that could make rapid decisions. And Step 3, they launched sweeping reforms to modernize practically overnight. We're talking building railways, establishing a national conscript army modeled on European powers, and instituting compulsory education. So how did they actually manage this massive upheaval without losing their identity in the process? Well, their strategy was brilliant. They successfully integrated Western technology with their unique national identity. The whole concept was often summed up by the phrase, Japanese spirit, Western techniques. You see, they didn't just blindly copy the West. They brought in thousands of foreign advisors to build factories, draft a constitution, and train soldiers. But they deliberately anchored all of that new power to their distinct cultural core. For instance, they adopted modern corporate structures, right? But then they infused them with traditional Japanese concepts of family loyalty. It was Western machinery, absolutely, but it was driven by a uniquely Japanese spirit. Part 3. Rise of an Empire. Let's see how this all builds, because this aggressive modernization set some staggering geopolitical consequences into motion. We start back in 1853 with that intense military vulnerability we talked about. But thanks to the rapid-fire reforms of the Meiji period, Japan soon goes on the offensive to secure its borders and project its power. First, in 1895, they decisively defeat China, claiming territory and totally shocking the region. Then, absolutely astonishing the global community, they defeat Russia in 1905. Guys, this was a monumental turning point. It was literally the first time in the modern era that an Asian nation defeated a major European power in a full-scale war. By the early 1900s, Japan had entirely flipped the script, evolving from a potential target of Western colonization right into Asia's primary imperial force. Now, to understand the full picture of this new imperial status, we really have to look at the complex, dual-sided reality of this historical ascent. On one side of the ledger, we see incredible industrial progress, a true marvel of rapid national development that lifted Japan onto the world stage. But on the flip side, as the historical record clearly shows, this rise was heavily marked by the harsh exploitation of its neighbors. Japan's growing need for resources to feed its brand new industrial machine led straight to the annexation of territories like Korea and Taiwan. So their triumph, their ability to secure their own sovereignty, it came at a severe, devastating cost to the surrounding region.
Which leaves us with a final, really complex question to think about. When a nation is forced to modernize just to survive, where exactly is the line between self-defense and becoming the very threat you once feared? Japan's Meiji transformation began as a desperate bid to avoid colonization by encroaching foreign powers, yet it ended with Japan itself becoming an expanding imperial force. It's a dramatic, unforgettable irony that perfectly encapsulates the high stakes of global history. Thanks for joining me to unpack this fascinating explainer.